I'm Dr. Edward Spencer. This is the first of a series which we're putting together, which is designed, and the design is in progress, to fix the world. And you may ask, well, fixing the world, isn't that a big order? And the answer is yes, it is. And what will come out of this is that the world has never been fixed. The world that we know has never been fixed. I'll start with a few concepts which are, of course, are unpopular in the establishment and the news, and that would be conspiracy. We know that there is no great conspiracy, and the reason we know this is that our presidents and the various talking heads on television tell us that there is no conspiracy. And what is a conspiracy? A conspiracy is really, for the purposes of this discussion, people, men of power, get together in a room or somewhere else and make plans for all of the rest of us and don't bother to tell us, and the plans may be unusual, illegal, or have very deleterious consequences. And certainly conspiracies that we can talk about are the Federal Reserve, an obvious conspiracy, the Kennedy assassination, and the 9/11 attacks. And if you consider those the conspiracies, then there are definitely major conspiracies. What about everything in between? Well, I think if you keep looking at things in detail, really going through it, you'll find that we're in a matrix of lies. And at one point, we may have thought we weren't, but now it's becoming increasingly obvious that we live in a world constructed of lies, a matrix of lies. And where did this come from, and how do we get out of it? Well, the reason, the problem is within our minds, within our method of thinking. And this is long-standing. It's almost as though the matrix of lies, the conspiracies, have been designed around imperfections, weaknesses of the human mind. And I'm pretty sure that this is actually the case. And another thing that one may notice in this is that lots of people are bamboozled, heavily bamboozled. It seems that the more educated, powerful, and rich a man is, the more easily is he bamboozled. And that would seem to be due to ego, to rewards, to bribes almost, to public opinion, to going along with the flow. And if you drop down from being rich and powerful, it's easier to establish that something weird is going on. Now, how long has this been in place? It's been in place as long as we can remember. Well, I shouldn't say that, since our memories, individual memories, aren't that long. But it goes right back to the beginning of recorded history. And so we're talking about a time frame on the order of 6,000 years. And on studying this, one finds that the Hebrews are very important, that by tracking their history, you can actually see what has been going on. And, of course, this is dangerous territory, dangerous to talk about this. All kinds of things go bad for you if you mention the Hebrew and their power and their money and Israel and the Holocaust and all of that. So it's a dangerous area to talk about. Excuse me. And you will find yourself unpopular and maybe even targeted by legal methods or loss of your job or other financial things if you go in this direction. But it also happens that this is not limited to Israel and the Hebrews. And over in Japan, it turns out that talking about certain things, about certain cults, other countries, will get you fired too. So it's a matter of free speech. It's a matter of knowing what's going on. So this story really follows the history of the Jewish people. And what I'm trying to do with this scenario that I'm going to tell you about is to help the Jewish people. And they're not going to believe that right off, but it will become very clear to some what I'm talking about. I learned about much of what I know by working with Eustace Mullins. He was a great writer. He wrote The Secrets of the Federal Reserve. He was a protege of Ezra Pound, who was incarcerated at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the psychiatric incarceration, which I think is increasing now. So Eustace was brilliant and knew quite a lot. He wrote a book, and the book was Mullins' New History of the Jews. And in this book, he wrote that Babylon, Persia, Greece, Egypt, and Rome were all taken down by something with the Jews, in the Jews, something in Judaism, that they collapsed by subversion. They weren't militarily overcome, though of course somebody came in after the door was knocked down and could pick up the pieces. And he stated, he wrote, that the Romans knew what had happened. And in fact, Julius Caesar had been assassinated because he could not or would not control the Jews. And it was recognized that something there was going on. So after the Western Roman Empire collapsed, they began the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, and this empire lasted more than 1,000 years. And it did not collapse. It was finally overcome militarily by the combined forces of of Turkey and Venice. And what I was told is that in the Eastern Roman Empire, the Hebrews were kept out of education and government. And the other thing is the control of money, is that apparently Byzantium used gold. Something I want to know more about. So Byzantium lasted 1,000 years, and it's kind of a void. We know an awful lot about the Western Roman Empire, and there are all kinds of movies and serials and things that we know about, but we know very little about Byzantium. So how is this? What is going on here? This bit of information that Eustace imparted to me really kind of directed the whole operation. It's clear that right now in the modern era that Israel is deadly. All kinds of things are going on that can be attributed to Israel. Of course, you have the Palestinian situation and the AIPAC and the ADL everywhere in the United States. In fact, the United States is, I guess, a dog being wagged by the Israeli tail. We know that. So by looking at what we know in the present and extrapolating back, we can see that these empires, Byzantium, or rather Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Egypt, could have succumbed to much the same sort of thing that we see now. And then the question that comes up is, well, how could the Hebrew be so incredibly proficient and knowledgeable about obliterating a civilization, one of these ancient empires? I mean, how did they just start out that way? And then the question, of course, is why? Why would they do this? And, of course, the answer that they are all given is, that it's anti-Semitism to even think this way, that they're defending themselves against anti-Semitism, whatever. But then it doesn't seem rational that that the Hebrew, who are so very studious and smart, would just make a career out of destroying civilizations. But that's what the record tells us. So I was trying to find out what was going on with the world. I began this in 1996, and that led to actually bringing Eustace Mullins out to California in the year 2007 and talking to him and learning more about it. It became obvious that something very strange was going on, and the Hebrew were part of it. Now, nothing made any sense to me out of that until I encountered a book titled Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings by Charles Hapgood. This book was published in 1966. So that was the first time a lot of us could see that there was something going on in the Ice Age that we hadn't been told about. The entire Earth was mapped during the Ice Age when the sea level was 400 feet lower. Graham Hancock described much of this. The coast of Antarctica, Queen Maudland coast, was entirely free of ice, and the ice cap there now is a mile deep. And the Piraeus map, that one of the maps that Hapgood was working with, was reviewed by the United States Air Force in New Hampshire, and they concurred. This was a map that showed Antarctica, and we couldn't figure out how this happened because of the fact that the ice was now a mile deep. So at this point, one could see that somebody had trained the Hebrews. Somebody had educated them and turned them into a force that was essentially irresistible. And that it didn't start 6,000 years ago. It could easily have started well before that, during the Ice Age. And that this information, this technique, this incredible understanding has a very long history, longer than 6,000 years. Well, Charles Hapgood was a teacher at a teacher's college in New Hampshire, and had his students work with him on studying the maps to produce this book, the maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. I have a friend who knew something about Hapgood, and note that he was described as a weirdo. And he has written that, that the formal education might not teach you as much as just getting down and doing it. Anyway, it became clear that there was a pathway back into time where the Hebrews may have learned about taking down civilizations. And then there are other things you wonder about. Where did they come from? Where did the secret societies come from? Where did the occult business come from? Where did money and all of that stuff come from? It's all supposed to, so much is supposed to have come from Babylon, I guess, Summer. But it almost looks like Babylon is described as a window to the past, used as a window. Everything came from it. Almost too much came from it. So it was clear then that we do have a long history. And then another bit of physical evidence emerged from this, which is very important, and that is circumcision. As we know, the Hebrews are circumcised, and this is an important ritual. But the foreskin is considered, a throwaway. I think the word schmuck comes from is a term for foreskin as something that's useless. But it turns out those who have been studying the foreskin find that it's an important structure, that it has nerve endings in it, of course, that there's chemical secretions involved, sensation involved, and that it is significant in the bonding of a man and a woman. And if this bonding does not take place, if the sort of the neurological image of the woman as something the man wants to bond to, if that image is missing in the nervous system, there are repercussions, and societal repercussions. So it seems like circumcision isn't just whacking off the foreskin. It has it's a very significant thing to do, and one would think, or the way I looked at it, was almost showing that the Jews had been captured and had gotten this tradition going. So that's something that goes back. And you would say, well, if this is done on the basis of having an effect, a societal effect, how long was the period of observation to establish that? How many generations did somebody have to observe to conclude that it was a way of controlling society, or at least a partial way of controlling society? And I think the answer to that is a long time. I don't say how you can get it short. Get a short period of time for that observation. So the whole thing then stretches back beyond 6,000 years, almost to a point, of course, that we cannot readily define. The next bit of information that came along and that really kind of put it all together was in the form of a book by professors Lynch and Granger. And that book is Big Brain, published in 2008. I think a very important book. And it's sort of based on the story of Boskop Man. And the Boskop Man is essentially a skull that was discovered in Boskop, South Africa in about 1913. A couple of workers, story goes, they found the skull. It looked unusual to them. They were wondering what it was, and they took it to a museum where it was recognized as being a significant find. And eventually the world learned of this and began looking at it. It apparently excited British paleontology very much. And they were very interested in learning more about the Boskop skull. But then something happened which kind of took their mind off of this finding in South Africa, and that was the Piltdown Man, and which was close to England, which was in England and close, to, I guess, to the facility there, close to Charles Darwin's home. But Piltdown Man was a hoax. So a hoax took this rather interesting find off the map of British paleontologists. But a renowned paleontologist by the name of R. Broom went to South Africa and studied the Boskop skull and made certain observations. The skull had a very large jaw with large incisors and canines, a powerful jaw. The brain cavity was quite large compared to normal humans, was about 30% larger. And Broom was of the opinion that this finding deserved to be called another species. And he defined or named this finding Homo Capensis. And for those of you who have probably listened to Karen Hudis, the whistleblower from the World Bank, you've heard that name. So immediately became obvious that there was another candidate for mapping the Earth other than plain old human beings, Homo sapiens. And that candidate was somebody, or maybe something would be the name, who was not truly human, but of a different species. And what that means is the species usually means that reproduction or mating between a different species does not produce a fertile offspring. That it's sort of a mule finding. That is to say, the union of a donkey and a horse produces a sterile mule. And so we have these two, we have this Homo Capensis there. Now, it's interesting in that a paleontologist by the name of Fitzmyer did further investigations in that area, and I think maybe about 100 miles north, and found an area which was appeared to be a communal living area, and there were human skeletons there, which were described as having been casually interred. I guess they were just thrown into the ground. But they found in the same area a rather elaborate tomb with a single occupant positioned so that he was facing the rising sun. And this single occupant, who had a normal appearing skeleton, had a very large head. So one could take this information as indicating that this large brain, this large-headed species, was dominant over Homo sapiens, was dominant over humans at that time. I'd like to show you another book, which is very important. This is by Brian Foster and David Hatchett Childress. It's The Enigma of Cranial Deformation, and it has many photographs of these large skulls. And Foster's done excellent work, and he's traveled around. I think he runs Hidden Inca tours in South America. And he has actually managed to get some DNA studies done, which show that these skulls are not, or at least the skull that was studied was not human. He's managed to stay out of the way of establishment paleontology and archaeology, perhaps the secret to his success. Because the other part of the story, which I hadn't really mentioned and which is ongoing, is that all of this is ignored by establishment institutions. You would think that when you found a skull with a giant cone head, that when you told the establishment institutions about this, they would jump right on it, get their kit, and go and study it completely. But that does not happen. And this is highly significant. This is, in many ways, I think, the history of what's happening to us, the history of our decline right here, in that universities seem to be filled with bright lights, with high IQs that are isolated in little dark boxes and don't really get their talent utilized or communicated as it should be, because the world is not made of little dark boxes. At any rate, there we have Brian Foster's work, and he has found skulls that are large cone heads. These are even larger than the Homo Capensis. They're different in that they have large orbits, about 20% larger than human. They have one parietal plate instead of two, like we do. A very large, heavy cone head, and occipital foramen high in the occipital region. They also have very big incisors and canine teeth, and few or any, if any, molars, which would seem to indicate that they are meat eaters, primarily. So that's another important finding, these large skulls, which the professionals ignore. And I personally have sent letters out and found that to some institutions and experts, and found out that they won't answer. They will not respond to this information, and I don't know if they've ever seen it before or not. So what we're seeing here in this microcosm of ignoring the skulls is, I think, basically the way the world works. Ignore the information. Don't be too curious. Keep your head low. And the result of that is a rather serious decline in the structure of society all over the place, and a total confusion in our minds about what is going on and what is possible. though it may not sound like it, I may not give the impression, I think that we're on the verge of a very exciting advance of Homo sapiens. That in the sense that we're, excuse me, free at last, to use that phrase, and that maybe we can take charge of our life and take charge of our brains, and we have to do that first, and really turn everything into beauty, really, creative beauty. The potential is there, but we are so repressed by a number of forces. And remember, the smarter and richer someone is, the easier he is bamboozled. That would seem to be the rule here. Now, to get back to helping the Jews, which they may not believe that's what I'm doing, but I'm telling the truth here, and that is what we need. That's what's going to help us go forward and get out of this mess. If on a scientific way, if you have an hypothesis, or you might want to upgrade it to a theory, you can make predictions on that, on basis of that. And of course, this is done in scientific circles all of the time. What the prediction I could make on the basis of the Hebrew nation being a covert force trained by forces, by entities unknown to damage civilization, to disrupt civilization, that this theory implies that at some point in the past, one could establish a contact with the originators of the training to produce this degree of brilliance at subversion. I'm trying to make it soft. But this is really what it comes down to. So going back in time, what do we find? We should find that the Jewish nation at some point was in contact with something that could have molded them in a way which is most unusual. And the Jewish scholars have done just that and have gone through Jewish history and come up with some very surprising findings. Reaching for a book here. This book is by two rabbis. And reading the front cover, discover that the chosen people were Egyptians. The Hebrews were the conquering rulers, not slaves. Moses was the Egyptian Pharaoh Ramses I, and other earth-shattering facts. Some 60 years ago, Sigmund Freud speculated that Moses was not a Hebrew, but an Egyptian. After 20 years of research, Massage and Roger Sabin, excuse me for that, discovered not only that Moses was not a Hebrew, but that neither was the patriarch Abraham. Not only were they Egyptians, they were also pharaohs. So that is sort of a shocker. It certainly disrupts the Jewish history as is put forward by the Old Testament and other whatever you can think of. But this is just, it turns out, this is just the beginning of the story. What were the pharaohs? What were these particular pharaohs? What was Akhenaten in general, or Akhenaten specifically? Now, it turns out that on reviewing all kinds of information that we have about Akhenaten, he was not human. He was a big-brain hominid, and he had daughters that were big-brained hominids, and it looked like Nefertiti, his wife, was too. Moreover, Akhenaten was thought of very poorly by the Egyptians because he seemed to be determined to destroy Egyptian civilization. Okay, another book, really beautiful book, The Royal Women of Amarna. And this shows the royal women, and it shows Akhenaten's daughters. We have a picture here of one of them, a model of a sculpture. On the opposite side, there's a painting of two daughters. You can see the heads are quite unusual. And there are some sculptures of a daughter. You can see this. See the extraordinary posterior protuberance, the axial protuberance of the heads. I don't know if they could hear me, but the heads protrude occipitally. Now, in this day and age, heads like this have been observed in Egypt. And Azumi Takahashi, who we will be talking to later, has observed this and actually drew up a little picture. And the heads are not normal. These individuals are walking around, but they have these really big heads. There's a question as well, could those not be Akhenaten's daughters? Were they fooling us? Were they somebody else's daughter? But it seems like the family, the situation there is, it's very clear that the beings had very large heads consistent with either Homo Capensis or the monoparietal plate large cone heads. In other words, they were not human. And let's say, what does it mean that they were not human, that they're not Homo sapiens? They had different nervous system. Lynch and Granger, in their book Big Brain, did a calculation on the possible IQ of Homo Capensis. And this was based on the size of the increase in area of the association areas for a brain 30% larger. And they came up with an average IQ of 149, with 10 to 15% of the population reaching 180 or more. And that's a lot. Now, I think evidence at this point seems to indicate that this was really primarily mathematical computation and not artistic ability or other functions, but primarily mathematical. This is just from looking at the whole situation, the pyramids, the Adams calendar in southern Africa and now South Africa. But that's a lot of brain power, and so I think it's quite likely that this brain power is still out there and being used to control us. That's the logical conclusion, because so many things are wrong. Basically, everything is wrong. We're in a world of absolute chaos in respect to our minds. We've heard of the dumbing down, and it's horrendous. If you follow the schoolwork, if you follow the news, they call the news, about the only thing you can really count on are sports scores, and we have so many multi lies coming at us. And one disturbing thing is that our rulers don't seem to care. They seem happy to lie to us, to fool us, bamboozle us in every way that they can. And why is that? They are, in some cases, psychopathic personalities for sure. And then as a result of being in a secret society or in religious orders, one can be trained to be a psychopath, which is to say not have empathy and to not tell the truth, to have some abstract situation that you worship, that controls you. And so this is the hazards of secret societies. Now, in respect to the Hebrews, it's obvious that there is no real ethical basis to their religion. It's been discredited, and they have been bamboozled, and their feelings of being special have been imposed on them by something that created them as a subversive force. I don't see how you can conclude other than that, and they need to change right now, and it's going to be very painful for people who have been trained from the beginning to think that they're entirely special, that they're God's chosen children, that they can do no wrong, and that everybody's out to get them. And they are going to have to look at how this entire system has been put together and functioned over the years. Because it's clear at this point that we're looking at a system of bamboozlement and abuse that has been directed at the Jews and also probably to the secret societies that work with the elite in the Hebrew in Judaism. It's very clear that the ordinary Jewish person is unaware of what's been going on. And this was apparently even written about in the introduction to the protocols, that the snake would traverse the world, go around the world, eating power wherever it went. And that the body of the snake, the Jewish people would not know what was going on. So this is difficult, very difficult. but I have confidence that people will get through it.